I would be a traitor to these poor burned bodies if I came here to talk good fellowship. We have tried, you good people of the public, and we have found you wanting. The old Inquisition had its rack and its thumbscrews and its instruments of torture with iron teeth. We know what these things are today. The iron teeth are our necessities. The thumbscrews are the high-powered and swift machinery close to which we must work. And the rack is here in the fire-trap structures that will destroy us the minute they catch on fire. That's labor activist Rose Schneiderman speaking after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, a disaster so horrifying it turned grief into legislation. And today, that's our theme. Progressivism wasn't just an attitude. It became a fight over power in an industrializing society.
Thud. Dead. Thud.
Thud.
Dead. Thud. Dead. That's from a documentary about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. When people hear progressive era, what are they thinking? They're thinking muckrakers, reform laws, and Teddy Roosevelt punching trusts in the face.
Which, yes, those things.
Actually,
But
Taft punched more trusts in the face than Teddy did.
right. But we're also going to talk about how progressives are trying to clean up democracy. That includes cities, elections, political machines, and how some reforms turned into social control, things like temperance, immigration restrictions, and even eugenics.
Right. So it's going to be one of those episodes where you're like, wow, they passed child labor laws. And 2 minutes later, you'll be like, wait, why are they measuring people's skulls?
So progressivism, it's a movement that is going to attempt to save democracy at the turn of the century, but sometimes it forgot to ask whose democracy it was saving.
And that's a lot to unpack. We're going to start in the crowded, crooked, and complicated heart of the American city. So let's go.
All right, I want you guys to picture the turn of the century city. Close your eyes.
Okay, I'm picturing it
Close them
right now.
Close them up.
Mhm.
We've got some of the first skyscrapers going up. We've got
So tall.
immigrants arriving by the millions. We've got streetcars. We've got
ding,
tenements. There's energy everywhere. And then the city government that feels like a racket.
Right. Because urban political machines could actually help people sometimes. They find jobs for people, coal in winter. Little Jimmy needs a new pair of shoes or something. But they also skimmed contracts. They padded payrolls, and they turned public services into private profit.
And that's where progressive political reform starts to feel like a bit of a rescue mission, because reformers are pushing for a new type of professional city management. They want less patronage. We talked about patronage last episode a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Less patronage, more expertise, and basically let's run the city like a successful business.
And it's a big shift because it's not just, vote the bums out. It's change the structure so the bums can't get in as easily.
Right. So you start seeing reforms like the commission governments. That's Galveston, Texas style right there.
Yeah.
And city manager systems. And the idea that government should be nonpartisan and efficient.
And notice the values that are baked into that. So it's an emphasis on expertise over mass party politics. Progressives want order over the messiness of mass democracy. And that's going to matter later when we talk about the darker side of progressive reform.
And I think that also reflects the efficiency of the industrial period, right? That we become so good at making things that reformers also think, why can't we be better at governing? And so that's where you kind of get all of this administrative reform and ideas about the perfect sort of bureaucracies. And that's a huge part of the progressive era.
Right. So if cities were the laboratory for these kinds of reforms, the states were the battlefield. So this is where we get Robert Fighting Bob La Follette of Wisconsin.
Fighting Bob.
Fighting Bob!
Fighting
That's a
Bob.
great nickname.
And Fightin' Bob's whole vibe is that the people are being robbed of real choice, which is in and of itself undemocratic. And that also applies to what was happening with the economy, too, with the buildup of monopolies. If people don't have a real choice, that's undemocratic. So Fightin' Bob thinks this is because party bosses in these cities, they are the ones picking candidates in these, smoke-filled back rooms. Corporations are going to be able to whisper into legislators' ears, and regular voters, especially working people, they get the leftovers.
Thank God that doesn't happen now.
No kidding.
Right.
So Lafayette he pushes through all these reforms, and he's aiming at especially the nominating process. Because if a political machine controls the nominations, then elections are basically just theater.
Right, and he's pretty blunt about where to start. Fighting Bob says, no, begin at the foundation to secure a better set of lawmakers.
He's pretty direct about what he wants because
I see what you
That's
did.
a good way to think about
the
it.
logic is the direct primary, which is the idea that if you actually let voters choose party nominees directly instead of party insiders, then you're giving much more of a choice.
I don't think most people realize that primaries come out of the progressive era. I think most people assume that's always been the case. But for the first half of American history, candidates were handpicked and selected by party machines for the most part.
Well, and even United States senators were picked by state legislatures, not by the people themselves.
So Lafayette and the progressives, they see this as a way to directly influence politics, but it's not just primaries because progressives also push these new mechanisms that are meant to make democracy more responsive. So the initiative, the ballot initiative, the referendum, the recall, sometimes these are associated with what went on in Oregon, but these are all ways to give the people more checks on party machines.
You're right. So pushers. So the story you can tell on an exam is this. Progressives try to break the grip of machines and corporations by expanding popular participation in some ways. In other words, bringing government closer to the people.
But there's also an important twist, an important nuance here, that some reforms also made voting harder for certain groups.
Right. And let's talk about kind of shifting, still in politics, but talking about the voting process, the secret ballot. It was also called the Australian ballot. And I should know this. I guess it's because it's what they did in Australia. I guess that's why it was called the Australian ballot.
Australia.
Good guess.
Australia.
Right. You call that a knife?
Yeah. Nice.
So the Australian ballot, or really the best way to think about it is the secret ballot, with the goal to reduce intimidation and bribery. So in other words, before this, not everywhere, but in some places, especially in cities, you would kind of have to publicly indicate who you were voting for so that party bosses could sort of watch over and make sure they could control your vote. And this way, party workers can't just hand you a printed ticket, walk you to the box, and make sure you put it in there. You get privacy, you get anonymity, and that increases the likelihood that you're going to vote with your conscience.
And the first state to adopt a statewide version of this in 1888. Take a guess. Take a guess who it was.
Well, I see it in front of me.
Wait. Okay. But who typically leads the way with regard to reform in education and all of those other types of social situations? Go on.
It's got to be Missouri, right? Oh, wait.
It's
Well,
gotta
you're really
be
close.
the city upon a hill turned into a colony, turned into a state, Massachusetts.
Oh, hello. And so from there, the model would spread.
But here's the paradox. Making voting more private can make it more democratic, but clean elections often come with registration rules, longer ballots, also literacy expectations, and those could reduce turnout among poor and immigrant voters.
So you can really frame it like this, and this is a lot of, whenever you're talking about progressives, it's they reform, but then they also control. So progressives are going to pursue democratization, but they also want this more scientific rationalization. And if you go down a certain road with rationalization, you could conclude that, hey, certain people shouldn't be a part of this process. People who can't read, people who don't really have knowledge, maybe they shouldn't be voting.
Right. And so progressives are trying to protect democracy from corruption, but they're also reshaping democracy into something that looks more like middle-class norms.
And that becomes very clear when tragedy hits and reform turns from good government into life or death.
March 25th, 1911, New York City. A fire breaks out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Workers, who are mostly young immigrant women, rush for the exits that are blocked, locked, or impossible to reach in time.
The death toll is going to shock the country. 146 people, again, largely young immigrant women. And the images really that come out of this are horrific. You've got bodies on sidewalks, crowds looking up in horror, and this becomes a national trauma.
And it also becomes a political turning point because this isn't a storm or an earthquake. This is a workplace, right? This is preventable. And one of the things I talk about with the progressive era, and I think all of American reform, is that unfortunately it's often reactive. It's not proactive. If it would have been proactive, yeah, this would have been preventable.
And I think it takes something this monumentally traumatic to really hit home with a lot of people, that a change has to occur. So Frances Perkins, who would later become a major reform figure, remembered details of that day, like doors being locked.
And that key, this idea that why were doors locked? Why was there no fire alarm system? Why weren't there sprinklers? And it's easy to understand why if you remember that in industrialized capitalism we have laissez-faire principles. And if a building owner didn't want to install safety procedures, if a company didn't want to have safety measures in place to protect their workers, there was no government to come in and enforce those rules. So progressivism uses is maybe the wrong word. It harnesses the outcry from the Triangle Factory fire, and it creates a new power, right? This tragedy becomes leverage. New York launches a series of investigations. You've got these progressive reformers like Al Smith and Robert Wagner who are going to help drive a wave of workplace safety laws. And it's the federal Labor Department that's later going to describe the state's factory investigations as one of the major engines of reform across the country.
And Frances Perkins will later become the first female Secretary of Labor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Under FDR.
I knew that. Yeah.
But
Mr. Hill, you knew that.
it wasn't
I did,
she
yeah.
wasn't the first Secretary of Labor.
Well, no.
I don't think.
No.
Of course
But she was the first female.
Well, no.
Yeah.
First female. Yeah, that's huge. So Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire becomes a symbol that government can intervene in the economy, not just to punish corruption, but also to protect life.
Yeah, okay, so let's pivot because progressives aren't...
Pivot.
That's the second time we've said pivot.
Is it?
Yes. Last week we said it too.
It's a good word. It helps it... You okay?
Yeah.
She was just pivoting.
I was pivoting.
Nice pivot. Okay, because progressives, they aren't only regulating factories and elections. They're also trying to regulate human behavior.
Aha. Like temperance. Temper your behavior. The argument here is moral. Did I say argument?
Argument.
It's the argument. No, it's the argument that is moral, but it's also economic and it's domestic. Alcohol destroys families, drains paychecks, fuels crime, and undermines worker discipline.
And just like other reform movements that we've seen in American history thus far, think about the Second Great Awakening, women's groups are huge.
Abolition.
Yeah. Frances Willard and the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, frame temperance as quote unquote home protection, and they link it to broader reform. That, you know, if drinking is abolished, then this will lead to more safety in the home. And so Willard is going to call it the do everything policy and do it all the time, whatever it takes to get this reform in place.
Do you guys show the image in class of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and they hold a sign that says, lips that touch liquor shall never touch ours.
Never touch ours.
I think that's probably one of the single most effective.
Yeah.
Because those...
No.
If you couldn't kiss those gals,
Yeah.
you change your ways.
Yeah, you change your ways.
Real quick.
I'd give up alcohol right there.
Okay, then you get the Anti-Saloon League. And that's less about moral persuasion and more about just pressure politics, because you've got individuals who, like Wayne Wheeler, who become famous for turning prohibition into this, it's a single issue political machine. In other words, either you're for it or against it, and your entire political identity really comes down to whether or not you are in favor.
Right, and as time goes on, World War I would add fuel to this. Very heightened anti-German sentiment hits breweries, and wartime conservation arguments make alcohol look very unpatriotic.
And that's going to lead to the 18th Amendment, a real change to the U.S. Constitution. And the text is very simple and sweeping. Quote, "The manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited."
And Congress passes it December 1917, states ratify in January 1919, and it takes effect roughly a year later. So we're a dry country now.
Right. And progressives see this as a social reform: healthier families, safer streets, more productive labor, a all-in-all cleaner society.
But also, we have to be honest that there's a cultural edge to this, that a lot of middle-class reformers looked at immigrant neighborhoods. They saw beer halls, they saw saloons at kind of the center of these cultures, and they thought, this is the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are seeing the multifaceted view of progressivism.
Yes,
It's too easy to
Yes,
Yes,
very
of course.
multifaceted.
It's
Yes,
too
indeed.
easy to tell a simple story that progressives reform society, right? It's true that they did, and we've seen some really good examples of this. But progressives didn't automatically use these, what we would think of progressive by modern standards.
Right. Some reformers genuinely wanted to help the working class, but what happens is others wanted to manage the working class, uplift them, quote unquote, civilize them, often on middle class terms.
And you see that in immigration restriction. And this is not the first time we've seen immigration restriction. We saw it in the not restriction, but just negative attitudes toward it in the antebellum period. And then our first immigration restriction law passed, the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. But in this same era, the progressive era that celebrates democracy, you also are hearing louder claims that the nation needs to control who belongs.
Yeah, figures like Teddy Roosevelt, who will...
Do your Teddy Roosevelt voice, Mr. Hill?
I'm Teddy Roosevelt, and you should listen to everything I say.
That's exactly what he sounded like.
Exactly.
Even Roosevelt, Teddy, and we're going to talk about him in a minute, but even Teddy could sound pretty harsh on this idea of Americanization. And he wrote, quote, Mike, do you want to... Mr. Hill, do you wanna...
There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism.
And so what he means by that is hyphenated means German - American, right? And so this idea that if you're how could you really be American and yet hold on to your old European identity?
Right. And then there's eugenics, which is basically the darkest science project in American reform history. It's fake science. It's the idea that social problems, poverty, crime, disability are actually hereditary, and the state should manage reproduction.
Yeah, so Indiana is going to pass the first major sterilization law in 1907. And this is really evidence, right, of how fast these ideas could become actual policy.
Eugenics supporters talked about immigration the same way. A chilling example comes from a letter quoted in a documentary where Charles Davenport asked, quote, "Can we build a wall high enough around this country to keep out these cheaper races?"
Right. And so reform isn't compassion anymore. It's establishing a hierarchy.
And historian Thomas Leonard uses a phrase that captures that mindset. He said reformers could act from compassion and contempt at the same time.
Okay, so progressive era. We don't want to just simplify it. It did expand regulation and democracy in some ways and for some people, but in others, it becomes restrictive and exclusive and kind of dark.
One, two, three. Country roads.
Take me home.
To the place
I belong.
Why are we doing this?
West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads.
Yeah.
Why not?
Okay. Are you
Because
doing?
we went to karaoke and that's what we sang, and so I
We're so
still have it
good.
in my mind.
We got a lot of compliments.
We're
Yeah,
really
I think
good.
we crushed.
We did.
We're
really
good
good.
with microphones,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Okay, back to progressivism. Let's talk about the progressive, right? There are many, but there is one who is larger than life, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought maybe
Oh, well, I thought you were
guys
going
would be
to talk about
excited
how,
about
how
Teddy.
he was kind of a weak, sickly,
Yeah, a sickly child.
sickly child that,
Sickly ti-
that
chick-
built him a chickly, chickly.
sickly child turned athlete, became
Yeah.
a Harvard man, a New York reformer. He was wasn't he police commissioner? of New
Oh
York?
yeah.
Yeah.
New York Police
He was
Commissioner.
a writer, a cowboy, a war hero, and basically the first president who feels like he has a podcast mic permanently attached to his face.
I know that somewhere in the ether, Teddy Roosevelt, the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt, is hearing what we're saying, and he likes it. There's a smile on that
think so?
very
Sure.
that wide, toothy grin on his face.
He would have sang "Country Roads" with us.
Oh,
Yeah.
Listen, that guy always
Wait,
knew where
can
the
you
camera
sing it
is.
in his voice?
Okay.
Country roads, take me home to the place I belong.
Wow.
Something like that.
Wow.
And then people around him are like, "Yes, sir, that was you nailed it. That was so good." So his ascension would take him to the vice presidency under William McKinley in 1901. Then McKinley is assassinated, and
Perfect.
that's well placed. And at the age of 42, Roosevelt becomes the youngest president in U.S. history.
And Roosevelt brings this new theory of presidential power. He later described the president as a steward of the people who was obligated to act for the public good, though we should mention this is really when you start to see the presidency become a more powerful place.
Yeah, there are some presidencies in American history which are real turning points for the idea of executive power. You know, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and now Lincoln, of course,
yeah.
and now Teddy Roosevelt. He really brings the presidency into the modern era, and that's huge, right? Because now the executive branch becomes an engine of reform, not just the legislative branch.
Yeah. So let's get to the trust busting myth, and of course the reality of it.
Punching trusts in the face.
Pow.
Roosevelt,
Pow, pow.
he liked to talk about his ability to punch,
Oh,
right?
he liked to talk.
He talked a lot, but in truth, Roosevelt was far from a radical. He was not anti-business. In fact, he was more of a let's see if we can work with business and
Yes.
provide some guardrails. But ultimately, corporate power is inevitable in his view of the world, and it was more that the public had to try to see what it could do to control it.
And that's why he starts to brand trusts as either good or bad. And he considered bad trusts to be corporations who abused consumers, who purposefully tried to crush competition, and who also engaged in corrupt politics.
Right, and his big brand is going to be called
The square deal.
fairness for labor, consumers, and business.
Roosevelt put it plainly, Mr. Hill.
When I say I believe in a square deal, I mean not merely that I stand for fair play, but that I stand for equal opportunity.
Well said. And you see the square deal in moments like the 1902 coal strike, where he, as head of the executive branch, is going to intervene instead of automatically just siding with the owners of the coal mines. And that really signals a shift that the federal government can actually be an arbiter of industrial conflict. And that is a totally new idea, right? Because coal is essential to American society at this point. It's what warms houses. It's the main source of energy. And so, this is why Teddy really brings in this new modern era of the presidency, because he's saying the government will do what is best for the majority of the people. And having coal is important to the majority of the people. And me, as head of the executive branch, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to to solve this. I wasn't ready with my button, so
Okay.
all right, here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna do a cheerful. I probably shouldn't. Here we go.
Now, let's do the really gross, icky, but important part: meat packing.
Thud. Dead. Thud. Dead. Upton Sinclair writes The Jungle to expose labor exploitation, but the public is not going to fixate necessarily on the labor exploitation, but on the contaminated meat.
Right, and we mentioned Upton Sinclair last episode, but he's a bit of a bridge for us to connect muckrakers with Teddy Roosevelt, because Sinclair made that joke that we quoted last episode about aiming at the public's heart and by accident hitting the stomach. But you could also make the case that what he really did was bring awareness to powerful progressives like Roosevelt.
And Roosevelt, he's at being a hearty man. I feel like he was at the breakfast table probably chomping down on a piece of sausage and reading Sinclair's book and went, "Oh my God!"
He probably said, "By jingo."
By jingo,
jingo.
that's the last sausage with human remains I'll ever eat in my life.
So he pushes Congress for federal inspection, and in a message, urging meat inspection, he argues for a stronger authority to supervise sanitary conditions in meat production. It's not a lot to ask.
And we take this for granted today, right? All of the management and supervision of our food, of our medicines, of our restaurants, right? Like all that regulation never existed before the progressive era. And we should all be lucky that we live in an era where it is regulated and it is supervised. And so this is really progressive reform in action, right? That you have this muckraking journalism that brings this horrible industry to the forefront of people's minds. That results in public outrage, which is also going to end up with federal regulations put in place to try to fix it.
And that's really the progressive era, right? There's public moral outrage, middle-class people with power put pressure, and a figure like Teddy Roosevelt uses the federal government as a tool.
Let me use a
for
math
change.
equation. Muckraking journalism plus public outrage equals federal regulation and reform.
That's a great equation.
Really well said.
Math
okay,
is
what do
a
we
really
get?
cool thing.
We get the
Not
Food
really.
and Drug Administration out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
and
meat,
the
meat
the
packing
Inspection
inspection,
Act.
and,
Yep.
and all other industries will follow, right? Okay, so Roosevelt is also very much interested in nature. He's a huge advocate after having spent quite a bit of time out west, and he will lead a landmark environmental movement as president. But we have to kind of explain the two different camps.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got two different groups of people here. We have first the conservationists, like a guy named Gifford. I pronounce his last name Pinchot.
I think
Yes.
it's Pinchot.
Yeah, I think
Pinchot,
Pinchot.
yeah.
We know it. All three of us.
We
We
agreed.
totally
Pinchot.
agree.
All right.
for us.
For the
It's
first
totally
time.
Pinchot.
And the conservationists, they favor managed use, that forests, public lands, right? These are lands in the West mostly that the federal government owns that have these have not been put up for sale for individual use. So these public lands should be used wisely, sustainably, and for the public.
Right. So that's the conservationists. So you also have the preservationists, people like John Muir, who would be the first president of the Sierra Club. He wants to protect wilderness for its own sake, not really taking into consideration like human involvement at all. Spiritually and aesthetically, Muir famously wrote, "In God's wildness lies the hope of the world."
Roosevelt, who's a big fan of John Muir, but he kind of has a foot in both camps, and so he does both. He expands protected lands dramatically, so this is where we get a lot of our national forests and monuments and parks, and he's going to help make environmental stewardship part of the federal government.
Yeah, and this is the reason, probably more than any other reason, that Teddy is my boy.
Yeah, this is his legacy, conservation, no doubt.
God, I love it.
His legacy is definitely not his successor.
It's not. So Roosevelt, I think he goes off, wants the big game hunt in Africa for a while. So he's leaving. He makes this promise that, I'm not going to run for re-election. And so he handpicks William Howard Taft as his successor. And they're kind of BFFs. I mean, they're pretty chummy. And Taft is, by all accounts, is progressive, but with a different personality. He's more legalistic, less charismatic.
Yeah, Taft actually brings more antitrust cases than Roosevelt. So, like I mentioned earlier, punching those trusts in the face, that was more Taft than anybody else. But he's going to lose Roosevelt's trust over issues like tariffs and conservation controversies. And so the Republican Party is really going to fracture because Teddy Roosevelt felt so abandoned. He felt like Taft had abandoned him, their friendship, and also their political beliefs.
This is going to, when we say it breaks apart the Republican Party, I mean, we mean that literally because Roosevelt runs under a progressive party, but really he's hoping to capture the Republican vote under this new Bull Moose party.
Right, and we know where that comes from, yes? Bull Moose?
Yeah, we do, but we should probably tell our listeners.
Well,
strong as a bull moose.
Yeah, and isn't he interviewed by a journalist who said, "How are you feeling?" And he's just gotten back in country, and what does he say? Something about
I feel as fit as a bull moose.
Right, powerful.
yeah. So
I
he's
had a dream last night. I swear, I had a
about
dream
Teddy
last
as a
night.
moose?
No, that there was a moose outside of my window.
What do you think that means?
I was in like my childhood bedroom, and I was looking out the window, and a moose passed by, and I thought, oh, the moose must be on their way to like the colder temperatures up north, and I wanted to take a video of the moose going across the yard because I thought no one's going to believe me if I say I saw a moose in the middle of the yard in the middle of the night.
Wow.
And
our moose.
and then the night
migratory?
before,
No.
I told you I had a dream about you, Mr. Hill, the night before.
Did I have antlers? Was I a moose?
No, that you
Okay.
punched somebody in the face.
Oh my God!
I told
Do
you
we
that.
have any psychoanalysts out there? Freudian
I'm
dream
having some weird
analysis?
dreams.
Go ahead
There's
and
a
write
lot,
in and
there's
tell
a
us what you
lot
think
to
that means.
unpack
Lot
here.
to unpack.
Wowzers! Yeah. So the bull moose, Teddy, he campaigns on something called he'll call the new nationalism, a stronger federal government to regulate the modern economy.
And he sums it up with this quote. Why don't you take that, Mr. Hill?
The new nationalism puts the national need before sectional or personal advantage.
Ultimately, though, Roosevelt sort of splits the party in two, and that hands the election to Woodrow Wilson. It's really the first time that the Democratic Party has a widespread election success since the Civil War. Wilson is kind of this scholar politician who offers a progressive vision, but it's a shift because he's offering what he calls new freedom. He wants to go even further by reducing the size of big business through government regulation and reform, and he wants to break up concentrated power completely in order to restore competition.
Yeah, and I always like to explain to my students that progressivism it's an ideology that spans both ends of the political spectrum, right? You've got the Republican progressives of Roosevelt and Taft, and then you've got your Democratic progressive and Wilson, and he understands the modern economy as something fundamentally new. And in his platform, The New Freedom, he's going to argue that modern life isn't organized like it was a generation earlier, that people are now submerged in corporate systems.
Right. And so under Wilson, you're going to get major reforms. 16th Amendment, enabling a federal income tax, something that, remember, the populists had asked for.
Yep.
The Federal Reserve Act, creating a central banking system. This is huge.
Huge.
The Clayton Antitrust Act that will replace the toothless Sherman Antitrust Act of the 1890s, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. Both of these were passed in 1914 to strengthen the regulation of unfair business practices.
Okay, so in terms of continuity and change, the federal government's role in the economy expands dramatically from the Gilded Age into the Progressive Age. And under both Republicans and Democrats, we continue to see this push for progressive reform through government action.
But Wilson also reveals the limits and what we can call the contradictions of progressivism.
Yeah, just we're going to add on to that, right? We already talked about some of the paradoxes with progressivism because in this case, Wilson doesn't begin as a champion of women's suffrage. He drags his feet politically, even as activists pressure the White House. He's eventually going to support it later, but not because it's instinct. It's really because public opinion becomes so dominant about women being given the right to vote.
And this is where Wilson really shows his inability to fully embrace progressive ideals, and it's in regards to race. Wilson's administration intentionally reinforces segregation throughout the federal government. And in a meeting with Black civil rights leader William Monroe Trotter, Wilson says, quote, segregation is not humiliating, but a benefit. And so we start to see that Wilson represents an old Southern perspective on American society.
Yeah, big time. So if the question is, what is progressivism? The answer is this. It really depends on who you are. Progressive reform could mean protection and empowerment, or it could mean exclusion.
Yeah.
That's a good place to kind of put a pin in it.
I think so. And I always like to remind my students, both movements and people, you just cannot put them in a nice, neat box. You know, they're so, like, thinking about Wilson and all of his contradictions. Jefferson was the same way, and every human is similar in that you just, while you think you can define them as one thing at one time, then they have another opinion that just is
human beings with flaws.
Yeah, seems totally contradictory.
And by studying these paradoxes, we
come to a more full understanding of our nation's history and our place in it.
Wow. We really
I went off script for that.
You know,
That was from
I
the
think
heart.
we just tied up everything in a nice bow.
Country roads.
All right,
take us
thanks for
home.
tuning in to A Push for All. If you liked the episode, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, or YouTube, and please leave us a review. If you got a topic you want us to cover, send us a message on Instagram at A Push for All.
Hey, you guys, happy President's Day.
And a happy President's Day to you as well.
Until next time, keep learning from yesterday to make sense of today.